I'm sorry. Go ahead. It's being
Now?
recorded to my list. Let me make sure. Yeah, it's recording. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Geldick. I'm the chair of the Land Use Committee. I'm noting the presence of a quorum, presence of my co-chair, Oral Selkridge, and committee members, Natalie Medina and John Johnson. Good evening, everybody. First thing I want to do is since today is the day after Pearl Harbor Day, I'd like to have a moment of silence for all the members of the armed forces who have been lost and perished in all the wars that the U.S. has found itself forced to be in. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. The first thing I would like to note is that everybody should be aware that this meeting is being recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, your only option is to leave the meeting. That's it. Number two, we're gonna have I don't have the October committee meeting minutes here in front of me, but I don't think anybody had any problems with them, and I would have them posted as they were. Let's go on to the BSA app. Do you want to have everybody note the conduct statement that was on the agenda? We will keep the option of enforcing that conduct statement. We don't want any personal attacks on anybody, and that's we'll start. Let's start with the agenda, which is the BSA application for 1500 Williams Bridge Road. That is, who was there from that application? Is it NJK Consulting? NJK Consulting, is that you? You're waiting to unmute.
Okay. All right. Hello, good evening. My name's Nancy Lee Paul. I'm with Nasir J. Kanzada Consulting. We had a meeting with the Land Use Committee, and we just had a few questions that were asked of us. So basically, we're removing the kiosk, and we're building a new convenience store alongside the property line that's shared with the firehouse. The canopy will be reduced to accommodate that. The kiosk will be removed in the center, and there will be one dispenser will be relocated in the center, and then another one will be added. So there'll be a total of 6 dispensers total. Four.
Total of 6 pumps now?
4. Hold on.
Basically, what you're telling me is that you're basically going to be a convenience store, that may sell gas on the side, not a gas station that sells a little bit of automotive products.
Well, yeah, it will not be selling any automotive products. It will be just selling gasoline and.
In essence, you're basically turning it into a convenience store, not a gas station anymore. Because
the primary use is gas station. The accessory use is. It's not a repair shop. It never was. It was always a gas station.
I understand that, but you're shifting the emphasis from selling gas, which is what it has now, to selling products, which, by the way, why don't we pump your gas while you're at it? And because you are reducing the number of pumps from 6 to 4, and also increasing the amount of products that you're selling. The kiosk now sells automotive accessories, basically.
We're only reducing 1 pump. We're removing 1 pump. But anyway, yes, there were 5, and now there will be 4.
Okay. Have you spoken to the firehouse about this?
We attempted to, but I wanted to make a couple of points. So the firehouse, the way the exposure is, I know there was a concern about whether, with their picnic area where they're eating outside. It's a southern exposure. However, where we think that they're eating is also right now is totally shaded by the canopy. The canopy is going to be cut back and the convenience store will be located there. So I don't think there's going to be a substantial difference in the amount of light. And because it is a southern exposure in the summertime, it's probably better to have a little bit of shade and not have straight sun.
But you weren't able to speak to the firehouse, correct? Anybody from the fire department, is that
No.
correct?
Not yet.
Chris, do you know if was one of the reasons we wanted to have this to invite the fire department? Did anybody from the fire department show
Well,
any interest?
we contacted the fire department. We spoke with Mr. Fabrizio Caro, which is the head of community affairs there. And he said that he might get somebody to be in the meeting tonight from the Fireplace 61, if I'm not wrong, Battalion 61. I don't see anybody being part of that.
Yeah.
None of the
All
names
right.
I can recognize them.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, your name, you told me your name, it went right out of my mind, and I apologize for that. I'm terrible on names. The first 50 times.
Nancy Lee Paul.
Nancy Lee Paul?
Mm-hmm.
Ms. LaPaul, could you go on? I'm sorry, I've interrupted you a little bit. I realize
All right.
that.
I think there was a question about whether there would be alcohol, beer or whatever sold. He's not sure at the moment, but we're assuming that probably good chances that there will be beer, alcohol, whatever, standard stuff that you get at a convenience store, or a lot of them. We don't believe there'll be any significant difference in the traffic flow. We're actually reducing it by one dispenser. We haven't changed the curb cuts substantially, just we're shifting one over. And don't know what else. I guess that was about all the questions that they had. We could have put a railing on the side if it is an issue of too much shade, possibly. We need a parapet. We could put a railing instead of a parapet on the side of the firehouse. That's one thing we could do to help.
Okay.
Nancy, just a quick question. Is this 24 hours, this store?
I believe yes.
Okay.
Okay, when anybody speaks, could you please identify yourself when you speak? And I'm Ken Gelnick speaking now. Whenever anybody starts speaking, please identify yourself. Does any of the committee members have any more questions?
No, not really. This is Oral Selkridge, Ken. I was just wondering, I'm not sure if the fire department is going to have any say into this proposal, and because Nancy was not Miss LaPaul has not been able to contact the fire department. Is it critical that she does, in your opinion, to make sure?
No, it's Ken Gelnick speaking again. No, it's not. I don't think it's not. And Chris said, can you confirm this, that you contacted somebody from the fire department and they were invited here?
Yeah, we contacted Fabrizio Caro, which is the director of community affairs or liaison community affairs, the fire department.
You know what?
And has he seen the proposal, Chris? This is Oral Selkridge.
I mean, you got to understand that community affairs or fire department doesn't get involved in that matter.
I see.
We just asked them that if anybody from ladder 61 will be present. He said,
Right.
You'll try.
Right. So what I'm
Definitely.
trying to, again, this is Oral. I'm just trying to get a good understanding as to the purpose of the store is, again, it's a convenience store, right? Right, Ms.
Yes.
LaPaul?
Correct. Yes.
And they'll just sell the typical products that you see in other convenience stores by gas stations, right?
Snacks, coffee, beverages.
Right, right. And you don't see any impact. Will it have parking areas located for the
We
people who
actually
are just coming
have,
there?
we have a couple of parking spaces. There's actually, we're proposing 4 parking spaces. Or
I mean,
actually, 5,
it's not,
6.
it's not,
Yeah, so we're proposing actually 6 parking spaces, one which will be handicapped.
right, and that location is near the entrance of this convenience store, right? Where it typically is
2 of
located.
them, the handicap is literally in 2 of the convenience store.
Right, and then you have the other parking available, and it's not a really busy area where it's like a highway where you'll have a lot of traffic coming in there going into the convenience store, right?
I don't think so. Whenever we've gone out, we don't go out all the time. It hasn't seemed to be, it's a large site. There always seem to be plenty of space for,
Well, this
and
is
you're
what,
not doing storage of cars because you're not doing auto repair. So it's
Right.
pretty in and out.
Right, so
This
the
can-
auto repair store is removed, right? To get
Right,
the
no, this is
convenience
just
store in there.
a food, snacks type store.
it's Ken Gilligan. If I recall going over, this is right around the corner from Einstein Hospital, and at that corner over there, not right at the corner, but it's the road leading down to Einstein, and then also to Waters Place. This is
Right.
Eastchester and Williamsbridge. This
Right.
is
Can I describe it quickly?
Sure.
This is right across from McDonald's, right next to the fire department. Across from that, it used to be Sonical. I remember very well this place because over there I used to clean the car, and they had some vacuum stands over there at the bottom, which they're going to remove, to my understanding, and that's where they're going to put the stand. It's
Yeah.
going to look up and down just like the Shell that is in Williamsbridge Road and Leidig Avenue, Shell
Yeah.
station.
something like that.
So they're going to
Gonna
have,
look sim-
yeah, it's going to look similar. Probably 3-4 parking space against the wall, where is the fire department, and the other 2 is going to be toward the back over there, facing east in this case, and
Yeah.
it's going to be right next to the
Okay.
store. It's going to be
Right, and the purpose of this convenience store again is because there's no real any kind of repairs going on now. So this is another means of making sure that
Gas stations
Yeah.
don't really make it on gas alone anymore. So it's
Yeah.
to
Yeah, 'cause
remain
quite a few
viable.
because Kenny, you know that the gas station around us too did the same thing too. The one
Yeah.
right here on
On
Allerton Avenue and near
Yeah.
near
the
Fish.
Sunoco over there. That's Sunoco.
Yeah, I mean that is a means of now where how you can make additional because you're not doing repairs anymore. Yeah, so
I don't think that station ever did repairs. They were only gas. They and the Hess that used to be across the street were only gas. And they're right. You're right. They can't make it on gas anymore. And if we want to have gas stations, we're gonna have to accommodate them and enable them to make it to be a profitable operation.
agreed. So no change in the curb cuts, right? It's basically the same.
The only we're on Williamsbridge, we are shifting the curb cuts. So the curb cut that's close to the firehouse is shifting over because right now it's just going to run into the convenience store. So we're
Right, so
shifting
you
it
have to-
over. And then the curb cut that is closest to Eastchester is actually moving towards the convenience store. So they're kind of, they're moving in like that a little bit.
Okay.
But they're basically to line up more with the actual the pumps.
Right, and it's a 24-hour convenience store.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they having any plans of selling any like liquor or anything out there? I was just going to.
We're assuming they will. The owner hasn't made up a firm decision, but most of these places they do. It's
beer and
rare
stuff
that they don't actually.
Okay, that's all my questions, Ken. And
Okay.
Paul, thank you.
Okay.
Hey,
It's
Ken,
Ken
it's
Gilligan.
John. Hey, Ken, it's
Good.
John Johnson. Quick
Good.
question. Are you guys putting on new tanks, or are you digging out the old tanks and then replacing them?
They're new tanks, yes.
Okay.
Does any other committee members have any other questions? Ken, y'all get hearing though, there's any, now we'd like to open up to the audience, to the public for a few minutes. Does any of the members of the public have any questions?
Yes, Ken. Having been on a land use committee for 6 years, I have several questions, unfortunately. I'm glad that you mentioned that the gas tanks are coming out, which would mean that the pump section is completely coming out too, and you're going to redesign the pump area to be a different way to match the new entrances, correct?
The two pumps along East Chester Road are staying. The pump that is in front of the kiosk is moving forward towards Williamsbridge Road, and there will be a pump put in place of the kiosk. The two pumps that are closest to the firehouse are being removed.
Okay, no, because I was just in the station this past week, so I know that you would have to change the configuration of the pumps in order to put such a kiosk, convenience store in. What will be the square footage of the convenience store?
I'd have to look up my, hold on a second. It can't be more than 2,500. That's the limit. All right, so it's only 1,344 square feet, which is about half of the 2,500 that would be allowed.
Okay.
Close to- well, not quite. I mean, but yeah, it's about half of what would be allowed.
Will the capacity of the gas tanks that are being put in be lower than what currently is at the station?
No, they're always put them in higher.
All right, okay. You're going to go for a beer and wine license, as most convenience stores do, I gather.
We're saying that the owner, well, the leasee really hadn't made a
Right.
firm commitment decision, but the assumption is probably yes.
Will there be any extras like a propane charging station or an
No.
electric charging station, possibly for the future?
Not now, not in this proposal now.
Okay, and I must tell the committee that on July 16th of this year, Community Board 10 held a public hearing on the station across the street, a similar BSA hearing where they're redoing that station. They're going to close off one of the two entrances to that old Hess station, which is on East Chester Road. They are going to put a 600 square foot freestanding what they call store next to in that space, which will be right next to the automotive store. When I asked if it will be in addition to the automotive store, the owner could not say. He just said it was going to be 600 square feet of selling space. So keep in mind that the Hess station across the street will reopen as a gas convenience store, but one of those entrances on East Chester Road will be closed. So I don't know how it affects traffic, how it will affect the fire department or whatever. This is where you should bring in the fire department to see how it does. Thank you.
Ken Gelnick again, are there any other questions from the members of the audience? Hearing no more questions, I would like to close this part, this matter. Ms. LaPaul, I thank you very much for your attendance and for your and for being here at this late hour. And
No problem.
I think you have any other closing remarks, or we will go on to the city.
I think it will actually be improvement of the site, and they've been maintaining the site fairly well, and this should actually look nicer, and I think it'll help the community.
Thanks, Ken Gill. Again, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the citywide zoning text amendment. Is that somebody who's here from city planning?
Yeah, there's a few of us. Thank you
Oh, good.
so much for this time. And I think you already heard James Moralia from City Planning, who's your agency liaison, is on the line. I think my name is Christine Camilleri, and I'm a planner in the Bronx Borough office, just for anyone I haven't met. And Sean Brady, my deputy director, just joined as well. And we'll be, yeah, I'll be walking through about 20-minute presentation, and then we'll invite James and Sean to join in as we respond to any questions you have.
Okay.
And so I'm going to share my screen, and I will, what's that, Sean?
Would you like me to try, Christine?
Maybe try, and if you
Sure.
can't, I'm ready if it doesn't work.
All right. First time I'm using Windstream, so.
Yeah, we ran into a little trouble. And I think as Sean pulls that up, I'll just kind of start by saying thank you all for taking the time to hear about this project, which has been really 8 years in the making. I think we'll see if that works, Sean. Otherwise, I'm ready. Pull it up.
Okay.
One note that that time is now about 7:55. We have finished with the first item on the agenda. We're on the second item on the agenda at 7:55.
And thanks for your patience. I feel like we are all learning to troubleshoot together and learn the value of redundancy with
Exactly.
our materials. So if that doesn't work, I can pull it up. But I think some context just while we work on this. I already mentioned this is a project that we've been working on for a long time as an agency that reflects a lot of input that we've gathered from communities throughout the city's floodplain and certainly in the Bronx over the last 8 years. And it is a set of recommendations for a citywide zoning text amendment that is really focused on increasing the safety of New York City's current and future floodplain building stock. And I'll pause there for a second. Are
you able to see that?
Yeah, I do. Does everyone else?
Okay.
Or just, I think that works. Thanks, Sean. That's great.
Big win.
And I think picking up where I just left off, we're here today because this proposal was referred out to all 59 community boards, borough boards, and borough presidents in the city as of October 19th, and it's now moving through the formal public review process, although some of you may have heard about this work before at previous at borough board meetings in the past, or even potentially at other community board meetings. But we're hoping to share some information with you today to help inform your understanding of what is a somewhat complex proposal, and specifically share some information about the recommendations that specifically speak to Community Board 11 and its flood-prone building stock. And so I'll walk through some context and background and then highlight those recommendations. Next slide. Great, and so this presentation in our work as an agency is focused on resiliency at the building scale, which is something quite specific, but we acknowledge that the work to increase the resiliency of the city overall is very important. It's very important that be tackled at multiple scales to be effective. No one scale of resiliency, be it infrastructure, coastal protection, or building scale resiliency really does everything. We really need to be working and having redundancy built in kind of at all of these scales, including emergency management planning. And so we have a lot of sister agencies that we work with closely who are involved in working on this issue at those other scales. And so it's important to note that, because this presentation will really focus on building scale resiliency, but just know that this proposal is part of a broader multi-tiered citywide strategy. Next slide. And as an agency, DCP has been involved in a lot of work since Hurricane Sandy, which is really where kind of the road to where we are now with this proposal really started. And this is work that really directly informed this proposal. And so just to kind of quickly recap some of that, in 2013, in the interest of facilitating reconstruction from Hurricane Sandy, temporary emergency zoning rules were adopted, and they were really focused on helping owners of storm damaged properties to rebuild without facing obstacles from zoning, like, for example, height restrictions. This is the set of rules that are currently in place today on the books in our zoning resolution, and these are the rules that we are looking to update, improve, and make permanent with the proposal that is before you. And we've always known we had to update these rules, and so really quickly after they were adopted, we jumped into thinking about, started to understand, what updates were needed and, in what ways we needed to go further. And so part of that work involved completing studies focused on, specific industries like industrial businesses, for instance, and the particular challenges that they face as far as, building buildings or constructing or retrofitting existing buildings more resiliently. We also looked at specific neighborhoods, that space faced really specific place-based challenges to resilient construction. We also, along with that, had a lot of conversations with people who live and work in the floodplain, and overall talked to, gathered input from over 2,000 people who work and live in the floodplain. And what's pictured on this slide in the middle there is a outreach summary document that you can access on our website that summarizes those conversations that certainly are related to zoning, but also go above and beyond that. And it's really been all of this work and conversations that directly informed our understanding of the need for this update and shaped the recommendations you'll hear about. And so we know a few things, that the 2013 text has some really important provisions, and we want to keep those. We want to make those a permanent part of our zoning. But we also know that it didn't go far enough in doing a few things, namely helping to reduce damage from future coastal flood events, helping buildings to be more resilient in the long term by accounting for climate change and sea level rise more proactively. And also, it didn't quite go far enough to help building owners to make changes to properties to potentially save on long-term flood insurance costs. So these are kind of some of the ideas we've been really thinking hard about. Next slide. And I think before I kind of jump into the proposal itself, I want to just clarify really what geography we're talking about and what the real bulk of this proposal really directly applies to. And so what you're looking at right now is a floodplain, a flood risk map that shows you the Bronx floodplain overall, and it's broken out by community board. I'm going to actually flip to the next slide, which actually zooms in a little more closely to Community Board 11, so you can kind of be looking at this as I explain what it is you're looking at. So the floodplain is an area that is determined by FEMA, which many of you may know already, and we reference flood insurance rate maps in trying to understand basically where regulations apply and to understand risk. And so there's two areas called out on this map. There's a blue area labeled the 1% annual chance floodplain, and a kind of more green area labeled the 0.2% annual chance floodplain. What's the blue area here is the area that faces really the most substantial risk of inundation during a serious storm event from coastal flooding. The greenish area is an area that still faces a moderate risk of flooding, but not quite as much as that 1% annual chance floodplain area. And just a few other notes on this on these geographies, it's helpful to understand that that blue area is actually where building code, which has a specific kind of set of rules that hold buildings to a higher standard due to this flood risk, applies if you're building a new building or making substantial alterations to an existing building. There's kind of a set of rules in building code that that kick in and that you have to comply with. But this green area doesn't really quite have that same level of regulation that applies if you're doing construction. But we still, are concerned about this green area because, we're thinking in the interest of thinking proactively and thinking about the potential for, storms to be more frequent and more extreme. We think it could be possible that this green area really could be at a higher risk of flooding in the future, and think our regulations, in zoning should reflect that risk. So next slide. And I failed to mention, but actually just going back to the previous slide, we're really looking at the eastern edge of Pelham Gardens and portions of Morris Park when we're kind of thinking about where, what the floodplain covers in Community District 11. And so with all that context, I can kind of start talking through really what this proposal is looking to do. And so what is on this slide is a summary of our 4 overarching goals for the proposal. And I think you can think of each of these goals as buckets, for our recommendations, and there's very specific ones that fall under each. In the interest of time and in also focusing on really what directly applies within Community District 11, this is really tailored and kind of filtered for the recommendations that apply in the areas we were just looking at. So I just want to mention that. But what I'll do is walk through each of these and highlight those recommendations as I walk through the goals. So next slide. And so the next recommendation really ties most directly into the first goal, which is to encourage resiliency throughout the city's current and future floodplains. And so going back to the flood risk map that we were looking at just a moment ago, thinking about that green area, I think I already mentioned we have a lot of regulation that applies to that blue area, but I think we're at the point where we really need to also start thinking about and planning for that green moderate risk floodplain as well. So next slide. So we have a lot of optional provisions in our zoning today that provides flexibility and relief in the event that someone retrofits an existing building or builds a new building in the floodplain. And these rules, allow you to potentially have what is considered a more flexible zoning envelope. So, that could mean providing additional side yard relief, allowing for a little additional floor area when you're designing a building to help recoup floor area lost. If you have a basement, say, and you have to retrofit a building and lose that subgrade space that's really vulnerable to flooding. But these are rules that are only available in that blue area, that higher risk floodplain area. And so if you want to do this proactively with the building today in that moderate risk area, you really can't. Also, in addition to that, if you want to take into account, not just your flood risk right now when you're designing a building or thinking about retrofitting a building, but you want to take into account, what is my flood risk going to look like in, say, 2050, you can't do that either. And so we think it makes sense to make these provisions, which are 100% optional, like those that allow for that kind of flexibility, to be made available throughout both that high risk floodplain and moderate risk floodplain in both of these areas. And so actually next, I'll flip to the next slide. So you can see what this looks like in Community District 11. And so what this text would do is expand the applicability of these optional rules to a broader set of buildings by allowing any lot located in both of these areas, the 1% annual chance floodplain and the 0.2% annual chance floodplain, to have access to these provisions. And so this is a significant and proactive change throughout the city. I'll say what you're looking at on the left is where the current emergency rules we've had in place since 2013 apply. And on the right, what's highlighted in that red color is what you can think of as the expansion area. This would be the new what we're expanding these provisions to. The lots that don't have the option of using these provisions, but would should this proposal be adopted. So it's a relatively small area, but I think it's helpful to understand exactly what area we're talking about. Next slide. And so goal number 2 is about supporting long-term resilient design for all building types. This goal really speaks to the reality that the city's floodplain overall is largely developed, and there isn't a whole lot of vacant land, and that is the case in the Bronx, and it is the case in Community Board 11 as well. We have a lot of different types of building typologies to think about, and so it's really important that when we write zoning rules, we are making sure we're not leaving buildings out of this framework or having, because what that results in is potentially having zoning rules stand in the way of a building being made safer, and we definitely don't want that. Next slide. And so this proposal would make it possible for optional zoning regulations that allow building owners to physically elevate habitable spaces and other building support features like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, for example, above the expected flood elevations in a more standardized way. Essentially, the idea is to allow for the same size building to be constructed on a particular lot, but out of harm's way. And so what this also means is that buildings can account potentially for more, for future flood risk more easily. And as I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation, recoup floor area that's lost when retrofitting, which is something we heard really broad support for through the outreach process. And so, you can imagine if someone has to choose between losing their basement or cellar, and making changes to their building to make it more flood proof, they're not going to choose to do that. So this is a really important, I think, part of this proposal. We actually do this today, again, in that 1% area, but it's just, making it an option in that moderate risk floodplain area, the 0.2%. Next slide. And so our third goal is to allow for adaptation over time through incremental retrofits. And so what this is about is we know it isn't always feasible or practical or required by code to fully retrofit a building to the highest resiliency standards. But, there's many smaller, what we call partial retrofits that can potentially go a really long way to help, a building to withstand a flood event. And so we want to offer enough flexibility in zoning to allow for these types of strategies to be taken on. Next slide. And so I think we know that buildings used for commercial manufacturing and industrial uses in particular can be very difficult to retrofit in the classic sense, through an elevation or something like that. But we have found that there's other cost-effective strategies like what you're seeing on this slide, which is a mezzanine constructed within a business that can actually allow for critical building support features like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, like critical storage to be raised out of harm's way. And so what this proposal would do would allow a floor area bonus. It's about 500 square feet. That would apply in places where zoning limits a manufacturing building to 1 story. And so I think there are places in this district that this really specific recommendation does apply to. And you can imagine this is something that could really help business to bounce back after an emergency. Next slide. And so this next goal and bucket of recommendations differs a little bit from the previous because these are rules that actually could apply outside of the floodplain. And so it's important to build upon lessons learned and to make sure that rules that facilitate the reconstruction of damaged buildings after a future storm or other type of disaster are readily available. So that's really what this kind of bucket of recommendations is about. Next slide. And so, we know Sandy showed us how a storm's effects can really go beyond the floodplain. And in particular, we saw how that played out with our energy grid. And so this proposal would allow power systems to be considered what we refer to in zoning as permitted obstructions in open areas across all zoning districts. And the hope is that this will help facilitate their installment more widely. Next slide. And this proposal does include rules that would limit the construction of nursing homes in high-risk flood-prone areas, as well as other areas that might have less vehicular access in the event of an evacuation specifically. And the reason for this is to lessen the health consequences and logistical challenges, of an evacuation in a facility that requires kind of continuous care. And so in the Bronx, there's two areas that are outside of the 1% annual chance floodplain that this would apply to. It's west of the major Deegan and community boards 5 and 7, and all of City Island. In addition to those areas, this proposal would prohibit the development of new nursing homes and the enlargement of existing facilities within the 1% annual chance floodplain. Next slide. And so as we know right now, as we move through the current pandemic, disasters arrive in all forms. And so rather than writing new emergency provisions every time a crisis strikes, this proposal would place recovery provisions directly in the zoning resolution so that more quickly they can be selected and applied based on the issues caused by the disaster and that particular recovery period. And so these could include things like cutting down on red tape and paperwork and allowing additional time for an affected grandfathered business to reopen, for instance. This is something we've heard a lot of support for and need for, and even more recently during this time. Next slide. And so this is really the end of this presentation. Just to give you a sense of where we are in the public review process, as I mentioned in the beginning, all community boards are currently reviewing this proposal and have until, I believe, December 28th to do so. But from here it will, and I should mention the borough boards and borough presidents are also reviewing it, but it will proceed along this kind of rough timeline of returning to the City Planning Commission and will be before the City Council. So I'll pause there for questions and just mention, I think, is there a slide after this, Sean? Oh, great. I was hoping there was. There's a list of resources that I can share. We can share a copy of this so your board members and anyone else who's interested can have a copy of this. These are places where you can go online and find even more information than I just shared with you, which I know already has been a lot, but just so you're aware, these are additional resources. Thank you for your attention. Happy to answer questions. I'm sure there might be a lot because this is a lot of information.
All right.
Okay. Kenny, you're on mute, Kenny.
Christine, thank you. And thank you for telling me that I'm like that. Again, I'm also learning this thing. Christine, you were right. It is a lot, and we thank you for a really nice presentation. First,
hey, this
board
is John
members.
Johnson. Yeah, Christine, how you doing? This is John Johnson. Just a couple of questions. So this is not in effect. These zoning loans haven't gone into effect yet, but they're proposed to when to go into effect?
John, I'm going to just repeat back what I think the question was, and correct me if I misheard you. I think it broke up a little bit. When would this be applied? Is that the question?
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So I think just kind of referring back to my timeline, based on the timeline of public review, we could be looking at adoption in May.
Oh, wow.
Is the answer, to that question.
So now when I submit plans to DOB and during the review process, they're going to incorporate all of these changes into my review process?
No, so actually the rules, okay, so I'll start by saying if you are designing a building or just applying for permits in that 1% annual chance floodplain, there are already code requirements, and those are, you might already know, it sounds like you're familiar with the permitting process, but the Appendix G requirements, would already be applied. This is about providing optional regulations, so it really shouldn't really interfere or delay, I think, like as of right projects in any way. It's just making kind of a suite of options available, for buildings, but I think the requirements, if there's resiliency requirements, your plan shouldn't be affected by those.
Right.
Yeah, I have a
question. Triggered.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys. I'm very interested in how the flood plain works and how I'm an architect, so I'm kind of familiar with the FEMA process and all that stuff. I'm always wondering why we are building buildings like this when we're raising them above grade. I know the purpose of it, and one of the problems with that is, right, if you have an elderly person living in a house, how do they navigate all those stairs, right? And even if you have someone who's injured, let's say I'm playing at my job or whatever, I fall downstairs or in the winter I twist my ankle. Now how do I navigate my now elevated stairs? Sometimes these like they did with the buildings in Staten Island and in Queens, they lifted them sometimes 18, 15 feet off the ground. I mean, almost a whole entire story. So I'm wondering why, in the first few things, can we do two things, like the flood? What's wrong with flood walls by the water, right? You're building a flood wall, so that helps to lower the height you have to go up, maybe, or doing something like floodgates on streets to stop the water from coming in. So it kind of alleviates the owner of if he has an existing house on a property, and now with the new zoning comes in, just like they did out there in Staten Island, they have to raise them up off the ground. If they're elderly, they're not going to want to do that. So why aren't we thinking about a different approach to being able to accommodate homes that are there now by building up flood walls along the water, just like they're proposing in Manhattan, where they're building an entire flood wall. So if the water does come in, it's not going above a certain level. And or a combination of the two, and high enough flood wall where so you can lower your what is that called, your flood zone.
Flood elevation, or I guess
your flood elevation. So you lower your flood elevation because now you're doing a combination of the two, so you don't have to go up 2 stories or whatever it is. Why aren't we looking at those options instead of having developers or homeowners spend millions of dollars like they did with Sandy, raising homes a house that will cost $200,000, they spend $1.5 million raising it up. That's what they did for the recovery, right? I mean, they you heard about the stories. They spent so much money raising them up. I'm not sure why aren't we looking at those options instead of trying to change the code to put the burden on homeowners.
I hope I didn't cut you off. Okay, I think you raised a lot of really important points, so I'm going to try to take them one by one and let me know if I miss anything. But I think the first point regarding accessibility, you know, it can't be understated how important that is. You know, when you're talking about, you know, it's a really important part of not only this proposal, but just thinking about resilient construction. So I'll have you know, in the emergency rules that we have in place today, we do allow for things like wheelchair ramps, wheelchair lifts, ramps, you know, any type of feature that, you know, particularly those required for ADA compliance to be permitted obstructions. But what we're actually, I didn't highlight it.
But that's a maintenance issue, right? I mean, people can, you know,
Sure.
just like an elevator, how homeowners going to maintain that wheelchair lift for years?
I hear that. I hear that. You know, as a problem. You know, how do you maintain a wheelchair? But I guess as far as zoning goes, you know, we do provide flexibility for those features not count towards at least the floor area of the building. We're actually looking to you know, expand this further with, you know, this proposal, because we're essentially offering that option to a wider array of buildings. You know, but I hear you on the maintenance issue, and I think, you know, kind of continuing to offer support to homeowners is something I'll say that, you know, a lot of our colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Resiliency are really focused on, and we actually have some private-public partnerships focused on that. And so I actually will, you know, make a point to flag that particular issue, you know, as kind of part of this ongoing process. But I think in addition to that, the seawall issue, you know, and infrastructure. You know, I think this goes back to the graphic I showed at the beginning of the slide. What I'll say is, we are, as a city, continuing to investigate, you know, infrastructure investments and you know, coastal protection, and looking really critically at where it makes sense to do so. That is a particular issue that typically involves multiple levels of government, and often requires coordination, you know, with the federal government, specifically the Army Corps of Engineers. You may have heard there was actually the New York and New Jersey harbor tributary study that's been ongoing. You know, that is still you know, something that, you know, is going on. We know that congressional funding would be needed for those measures. So, you know, that is just, there are funding complications and issues you run into with infrastructure. So essentially, in the meantime, you know, what we can control, you know, is looking at, you know, while we continue to explore those options, like I said, we need a layered approach. And so, you know, in the event that, you know, an infrastructure, you know, improvement, investment, you know, isn't possible at a certain location, that we have, you know, that through our building regulations, be it zoning or code, you know, we're accounting for that risk and making it possible, you know, for those sorts of measures to be incorporated into buildings. So I think just kind of really emphasize that, like, layered approach being necessary, because we know that infrastructure can be complicated in a lot of ways, and not really always work everywhere. But I fully agree with you. I think that, you know, that is also an important part of this kind of puzzle. One last kind of addition to that is that we actually are, as part of this proposal, you mentioned floodgates and like kind of deployable measures. We are seeking to allow those on open areas also as permitted obstructions. That is actually just kind of tweaking those rules and clarifying and expanding them. So at least through zoning, we're trying to make sure that that isn't another hoop that you have to jump through. But there's, you know, this is certainly complex in a lot of ways, and I appreciate you raising those points. Did I get everything? Or
No, I think you did. It's just that you know, we're looking at the construction of homes and the feasibility of building a home, but we're not looking at the human factor as far as how people live. You know, I go to Costco's and I come in with a bunch of groceries in my car. I have to go up a flight of navigate, and it's even in the winter, in the dead of winter, I'm navigating stairs to go up into my house, my newly elevated house. I mean, I know they're considering life as an issue, life safety as an issue, and is it very important. But I think that the city really needs to look at how humans live their life, and comparing that to their new regulations that they want. I think they're not looking at the human factor when they're coming up with all these rules about raising your house above the flood level, putting mechanical equipment in the attic area. They're not looking at how people live. People really don't live that way. I mean, people live in a different way. I mean, the human factor is sometimes ignored. And how do you really navigate this house? How do you really live in this house now? Not as elevated and my mechanical systems are out of the way. A guy needs to come in to repair something, has to go into the attic to repair it. I mean, these things you have to, and I'm getting older now. I can't navigate the stairs. My son broke his leg in a football game. He can't navigate the stairs. It's like, I think that the city really needs to look at other issues and look at the long-term expense of it. Is it worth building a seawall to maintain the way people typically have to live? I don't know.
I would just add, I think those are all really good points, and I do think, as a city, we're looking at all of that. I think on our end, what we want to make sure is that at least through zoning, that we are allowing people to do these things, allowing for homes, to be built in a safe and resilient manner, and not punishing people for wanting to get out of the floodplain. Because there's also, FEMA and flood insurance regulations that they have to follow aside from our building code rules.
Right.
Again, the significant investment around all of that that's needed. That's also a really big part of this. But I think in the interim, we want to make sure that we're not getting in the way of allowing people to build in a safe way. And that's, complicated. And there are all of these other elements. But first and foremost, I think with this not being another barrier.
Yeah, I think just as one last add-on, and I think I echo all of that and appreciate having this conversation. Our zoning and building code does also respond in some ways to federally set requirements for construction in the floodplain. And so I would just, mention that like we are kind of working, within a framework that exists and does, reflect federally set rules. But I also, I hear everything you're saying. And you raised some really important points.
That's it.
It's Ken Gelnick. Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you very much. It was a tremendously very nice presentation. It's,
Yeah. You take public.
Robert, wait 2 seconds, please. I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation. Now, is any other committee members have any comments or questions? If not, then
Yeah,
we'll take
just,
questions.
hold
John?
on one second.
Yeah.
This is John. This is John Johnson. Just a quick question. So I'm going to be selfish and just stay to our little community board here. So our major flood zone areas are probably down by the end of Gun Hill Road and into that area where we do have nursing homes there. But there's also a big redevelopment that we're thinking that's going to come to the Metro North Station at Pelham Parkway, which kind of falls in this flood zone. What impact do you think these new zoning laws are going to have to that Metro North Station? And there's a lot of M zones there, which means if we're limiting it to one floor and if we're elevating, how do you think that's going to impact the Metro North coming to us?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to talk a little bit about, the station and the service itself and some of the development that's happening there. And Christine, if you want to, hit upon some of the rules and correct me with maybe what I'm wrong about, but that's exactly right. The area that was shown on the community board 11 map is really the east side of the rail line, which is within the Hutchinson Metro Center. There's been a lot of recent development there. There's already a lot of planned development with the redevelopment of the Bronx Psychiatric site. And I think as Christina referred to earlier, all of that development will need to comply with the rules of Appendix G. So they'll have to follow the building code. So all new development and development that's already happened there has already followed those rules. That area, and I'm sure many of you are familiar, used to be marshland. It used to be, I think, called the Bear Creek Swamp some time ago. It was built on fill. And a lot of it, it is, and I think that's how it kind of relates to the floodplain today and why that area is in the floodplain. And while it hasn't seen significant flooding, it is, a big portion of it is in that high risk floodplain. I think as we're doing, and I know we've talked to you before, some of the work we're doing with the Metro North neighborhood study that we're looking at as part of the service, I think we'll be thinking about all of those things, including how the Hutchinson Metro Center is accessed. It only has one really access point today. For safety and circulation, we'll need to understand design of any new buildings. And so that's part of the work that we're thinking about as the planning for the new station comes in. But with any new development, they will have to follow that building code.
Sean,
And I
Ken
would
Gallen,
just-
building on that, right now, is the Hutchinson River Parkway part in the floodplain? The parkway itself, not
At least a portion of it, yeah.
the right portion of it right over there, and where it goes further on, where by the bridge, all of those. What is there anything being done to protect the parkway? Because that is. The answer is no. You're not doing anything specifically at this point.
So I think that this is something I would assume, I'm not sure if DOT has jurisdiction over the parkway, but
Okay.
I think this is where our partnerships with sister agencies and just what they're doing with infrastructure, comes into play. And I think, what Sean was just mentioning, the Metro North study is a pretty robust multi-agency effort. And so I think, I imagine as part of those conversations, develop, and kind of continue along, that's going to be part of the conversation. I think there's
And I would say that's right, Christine. The zoning text itself that we're presenting here doesn't apply. That actually, that portion of the Hutchinson River Parkway that kind of runs along Hutch Metro Center is under the jurisdiction of city DOT. And I think them and the Office of Emergency Management, as we're thinking about resiliency, are looking at those roadways too. That's something we can follow up on to see, kind of what the plans are. I mean, that's exactly right. In the event of emergency, it's an important route, to get cars out of the area.
Yeah.
All right.
And I wanted to just add, sorry, Kenneth.
It's okay.
I was just going to add, I know John had mentioned, or I think asked about manufacturing buildings specifically, and some vulnerable facilities in this area. And so just kind of responding to the question of what the effect of this could be for those, I think the hope, is that offering these optional provisions, in a more kind of standardized and flexible way, that, it would make it possible for these buildings to take on some of those measures we were citing, and manufacturing buildings, in particular, I think just to clarify that point, that proposal to allow for additional floor areas for mezzanines to be incorporated, it would particularly apply in M1 zones, because those are districts where we found in talking to industrial businesses in the floodplain, they run up against a floor area cap, that because the underlying zoning limits that building to 1 story. And so they couldn't actually do something like that because they don't have enough floor area they're working with. And so that's kind of, that's what we're talking about. It's just, providing just a little extra, flexibility, so something like that can be taken on, potentially. But I think the hope is just overall to, at least through zoning, facilitate, building owners entertaining these sorts of measures, if they're not required already.
Appreciate that. This is John again. Just on that same M1 zoning. So are you going to limit use groups like use group 4 and 5 in those M zones?
So this proposal doesn't seek to limit use groups further than they are already by the underlying zoning. Just to answer that question.
So no community facilities, and so we can still do community facilities and transient in those M zones if we have city planning approval.
Whatever is permitted by the underlying zoning as far as use groups would still, this proposal won't change anything about that.
Great, thank you.
All right. Any other committee members have any other questions? If not, then open it up to the members of the public. Anybody from the public?
Yes, Commissioner, Chairman Gelman. Now, I heard when I was on Community Board 8, Plan 2020 from the Bloomberg administration about rising water levels because we had the Metro North tracks right next to the Hudson River, the Hudson line, and they would flood out when big storms, and then the water would just recede. This is probably why there's no answer on the Hutchinson River Parkway, because if it floods out, the water will just recede within a day. However, the transformers during Sandy flooded out and had to be moved to higher ground, and that's been done already. We also received, though, with Plan 2050, a water retention plan. I don't hear that here. Why is there no water retention plan attached to this as was with Plan 2020? No one?
Looking to unmute myself. I couldn't remember where the button was. Thank you, Robert. I think that this is, again, I think where our interagency partners come into play. We know that we work really closely with DEP, who is really kind of lasered focus on the issue of stormwater management and green infrastructure as well. And I think are looking really to substantially, expand the green infrastructure program. But I think DEP is really the expert on what you just cited, the water retention plan. And so, like I said, this proposal is specifically focused on building scale resiliency. And I think that is something that, certainly touches this, but is a little outside of the scope of what this proposal is specifically focused on. But I think it's a really, another important point to raise kind of in the context of thinking about a multi-layered approach. That's something we need to be thinking about as a city for sure.
Presentation was by city planning, not DEP. Now, Community Board 11 has no real coastline. Community Board 10 has the coastline, and it has coastline all around it almost. But yet this presentation that you just gave was given to Community Board 10 for just City Island. Why was that?
So I did give a presentation in City Island, but I also have spoken to Community Board 10 many minutes about this proposal. Typically when I give a presentation, I limit it to, I think the audience is most interested in, which is the area that they, in. So I think just to clarify, I have given presentations about this to City Island that have been specific to City Island. I've also given presentations kind of in a lot of parts of the Bronx and always tailor it just like I tailored this one. So I work really close. We've worked really closely with Community Board 10 developing this proposal, just as a kind of footnote on that.
One final comment. Your flood plan map appears to have the Metro North, or rather the Transit Authority yards in it, which is at ground level, which is right across the street from Waters Place. And it appears to also have Westchester Square in there, which is right next to Westchester Creek, which is where your map goes down to. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, Westchester Square is no longer in Community Board 11. It's in Community Board 10 now. That was done under Jimmy Vaca when he was councilman. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, members of Department of City Planning, we thank you for your attendance and for your sacrifice in coming to this late meeting. And at this point, to close this part of the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. John.
Thank you. Thank you for the time and for the input and feedback.
All right.
Can you please,
Was-
can you
was a
send us
great
that presentation? Can you let the board know, can you send the presentation so we can take a look at it? Because the maps are very interesting and maybe
For sure.
something we want to talk about in other committees also.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'll particularly plug that last slide with resources also if you're looking for even more detail than you
Okay.
got
Awesome.
tonight. Yeah, for sure. We'll send that over. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, guys. Very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks,
Thanks,
Sean.
Christine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine, John, and Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you all. At this point, I'd like to close this part of the hearing. I don't know if we have any, is there any other additional public comment that anybody would like to make from the public? No? If not, I think at that point, we would have to go vote on, we should vote on whether we should recommend the board approve the BSA application for the gas station. Do I have a motion? Anybody have a motion for or against the approval of the gas station, of the application? I'd like to make a motion that we recommend that the full board approve the application at our next board meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye, that's 2, 3.
John Johnson. Yeah, aye.
Valerie Babb, aye.
And I think we also have, is Joe Picotti still here? Joe, you still here? No, you weren't.
Yes,
Joe, do you approve?
yes.
Thank you. I think it's unanimous then.
And Natalie Medina also voted yes, that she is for it. She can unmute her
Sorry.
phone.
I'm looking,
Sorry,
always-
this is Valerie Babb speaking. I just wanted to let you know in the chat that Natalie Medina also
Yeah.
said I am for it, but she can't.
seem to unmute. Okay.
Okay.
I don't have, I'm still learning how to use this thing. And,
That's fine.
when
We're
this-
all new at one point in our time, so it's completely
That's right.
uh,
Yeah.
You're great.
any
Kenny,
old
you're great.
business?
Yes.
Any old business? Any new business? At that point, I would like to make a motion to adjourn. Does anybody,
Second that
Have any-
motion.
sorry? Anybody,
Second
does
that
any,
motion.
I don't know who that is. Okay.
it's Joe
Joe
Picotti, I think.
Beto.
Oh, okay. Now I can. Now I'm trying to recognize the voice. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Joe
Anybody,
Beto.
Joe, are you making a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? At
Right.
that point, the meeting is adjourned at 8:47. Thank you, everybody, and I'll try to
Have a
have
good night, everyone. Good night,
Good
everyone.
night,
Good
everybody.
meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Stay safe.